Black CO asked to use the service door at his own luxury hotel. What he does next shocks everyone. The morning rain drummed against the windows of the black sedan as it pulled up to the gleaming entrance of the Grandview Palace Hotel. Through the tinted glass, Brandon Ellis watched the perfectly choreographed dance of luxury hospitality unfold before him. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to assist guests stepping out of Bentleys and Maseratis, while doormen swept open massive glass doors with practiced smiles. After 18 months away acquiring hotels across 3 continents, Brandon was finally home. But nobody at the Grandview knew he was coming. "Sir, shall I announce your arrival?" asked Marcus, his longtime driver, glancing in the rearview mirror. Brandon shook his head, adjusting the collar of his simple gray sweater. "No announcements. I want to see how things really run when the boss isn't watching." Marcus raised an eyebrow. In the 12 years he'd worked for Brandon, he'd never seen his employer dress so casually for a business visit. Gone were the $1,000 suits and Italian leather shoes. Today, Brandon looked like any other traveler, comfortable jeans, worn sneakers, and a backpack slung over his shoulder. "You sure about this approach, Mr. Ellis?" Brandon smiled, remembering his grandmother's words. "You learn more about people in 5 minutes when they think you're nobody than in 5 years when they know you're somebody." "Drop me at the side entrance," Brandon said. "And Marcus? Take the rest of the day off." The side entrance led through a covered walkway that connected to the main valet area. Brandon had specifically designed this entrance during the hotel's original construction to allow for discreet arrivals. As he stepped out into the humid morning air, he breathed in the familiar scent of jasmine from the hotel's gardens mixed with the subtle aroma of expensive cars. The Grandview Palace stood 42 stories tall, its glass facade reflecting the city skyline like a crystal mirror. Brandon felt a surge of pride looking at what he'd built from nothing. 15 years ago, this had been an abandoned warehouse district. Now it housed one of the most exclusive hotels in the country, with a waiting list for reservations that stretched 6 months. As he approached the main entrance, Brandon noticed the subtle changes from the renovation. New marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the lobby had been expanded to accommodate a stunning water feature that hadn't been there when he left. His design team had outdone themselves. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through his observations. "Sir, you can't come through here." Brandon turned to see a woman in an immaculate navy suit striding toward him. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gray eyes held the kind of authority that came from someone used to being obeyed. A gold nameplate on her lapel read, "Rachel Whitmore, Operations Manager." "I'm sorry," Brandon said, genuinely confused. "The guest entrance is for hotel guests only," Rachel said, her voice rising slightly. "Service staff and vendors need to use the service entrance around back." "Surely you were told this when you were hired?" Brandon glanced down at his casual clothes, then back at Rachel. He could feel the eyes of other staff members turning toward them, along with a few curious glances from guests in the lobby. The awkwardness of the moment was palpable. "I think there might be some confusion," Brandon began. "No confusion at all," Rachel interrupted, her tone becoming more condescending. "Look, I understand you might be new, but we have standards here at the Grandview. Our guests pay premium prices for an exclusive experience, and part of that means maintaining proper boundaries. Service staff use service entrances. It's really quite simple." Brandon felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times growing up, when people made assumptions about him based on his appearance. But this time was different. This was his hotel, his business, his reputation being shaped by this woman's behavior. "What makes you think I'm service staff?" Brandon asked quietly. Rachel's laugh was brittle. "Well, let's see. You're dressed like you're going to clean windows, you came through the side entrance instead of the main doors, and you certainly don't look like our typical clientele." She gestured toward the lobby where well-dressed guests moved through the space like actors in an expensive play. Behind Rachel, Brandon noticed other staff members watching the interaction with expressions ranging from embarrassment to outright discomfort. An older black bellhop named James, whom Brandon recognized from before his trip, caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if warning him to just comply. "The service entrance is clearly marked," Rachel continued, pulling out her phone. "I can call security to escort you if needed, but I'd prefer we handle this professionally." Brandon studied Rachel's face, noting the way her jaw was set, the slight flush of authority across her cheeks. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything at the Grandview Palace. "You're absolutely right," Brandon said, shouldering his backpack. "I apologize for the confusion. Could you point me toward the service entrance?" Rachel's expression softened slightly, pleased with his compliance. "Around the building, past the loading dock. Follow the signs for staff entry. And next time, remember, appearance matters in this business." As Brandon walked away, he heard Rachel addressing someone behind him. "Some people just don't understand luxury hospitality standards." Her voice carried a note of smug satisfaction. But what Rachel Whitmore didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. The man she just dismissed owned every marble tile beneath her feet, every crystal in the chandeliers above her head, and, as of that moment, every second of her remaining time at the Grandview Palace Hotel. Brandon walked slowly around the building, his mind racing as he processed what had just happened. The service entrance was tucked behind a concrete wall, hidden from the view of arriving guests. As he approached the plain metal door marked "Staff Entry," he noticed how different this world looked from the gleaming front entrance. Here, delivery trucks rumbled past, and the air smelled of kitchen grease and cleaning supplies instead of jasmine and luxury. He pushed through the service door and found himself in a narrow corridor lined with employee lockers and time clocks. The contrast was jarring. While the guest areas featured marble and gold, back here the walls were painted institutional beige, and fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Brandon?" He turned to see James, the bellhop who'd witnessed the lobby incident, hurrying toward him with concern written across his weathered face. "Mr. Ellis, sir, I am so sorry about what just happened out there," James whispered, glancing around nervously. "I wanted to say something, but—" "It's okay, James," Brandon said quietly. "How long has she been working here?" "Ms. Whitmore?" "About 8 months now. Started right after you left for your business trip." James's expression darkened. "Things have been different since she arrived." Before Brandon could respond, Rachel's voice echoed through the corridor from the lobby entrance. She was speaking to someone on her phone, her tone dripping with authority. "I don't care what the schedule says, Maria. I need those rooms turned over in 30 minutes, not an hour. Our VIP guests are arriving early, and I won't have them waiting because housekeeping can't keep up." Through the doorway, Brandon watched Rachel pace near the front desk, her phone pressed to her ear. A young Latina woman in a housekeeping uniform approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Whitmore," the woman said softly. "I'm Maria from housekeeping. You called down about the rooms, but we're short-staffed today because—" "I don't want to hear excuses," Rachel snapped, not bothering to end her phone call. "Figure it out. That's what you're paid for." She gestured dismissively with her free hand. "And next time, don't interrupt me when I'm on an important call." Maria's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as several guests in the lobby turned to look. She nodded silently and hurried away, but not before Brandon caught the hurt in her eyes. "She's been like that since day one," James murmured beside him. "Acts like she owns the place." Brandon watched as Rachel finished her call and immediately brightened when an elderly white couple in expensive clothing approached the front desk. Her entire demeanor transformed. The harsh lines around her mouth softened into a practiced smile, and her voice became warm and welcoming. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson! How wonderful to see you again!" Rachel gushed, coming around the desk to greet them personally. "I trust your flight was comfortable. I've personally ensured that your usual suite is ready, and I've taken the liberty of having champagne and strawberries sent up." The couple beamed at the attention. "Rachel, you're simply marvelous," Mrs. Patterson said. "This is exactly why we always stay at the Grandview. Nothing but the best for our most valued guests," Rachel replied, practically glowing under their praise. "If there's anything at all, you need during your stay, Please don't hesitate to call me directly." As the Pattersons were whisked away by a bellhop, Brandon noticed how Rachel's expression immediately returned to its previous coldness when she turned to address a young black man at the concierge desk. "Kevin, I need you to stay late tonight to cover the evening shift," she said curtly. "Angela called in sick again." "But Ms. Whitmore, I've already worked 6 days straight this week," Kevin protested politely. "My daughter has a school play tonight, and I promised." "I'm not interested in your personal commitments," Rachel cut him off. "This is a business, not a daycare center. If you can't handle the responsibilities of your position, perhaps we need to reconsider your employment." Kevin's shoulders sagged. "Yes, ma'am. I'll stay." "Good. And Kevin? Next time, don't question my decisions in front of guests. It's unprofessional." Brandon felt his jaw clench as he watched the interaction. Behind him, James shook his head sadly. "That's the 3rd time this month she's done that to Kevin," James whispered. "Good man, been here 5 years, never missed a day until his wife got sick last year. But ever since Ms. Whitmore arrived, it's like she's got it out for certain people." "What do you mean, certain people?" Brandon asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. James glanced around nervously. "Let's just say the staff she treats worst all seem to have something in common, if you know what I mean. Meanwhile, the ones who look like her get promoted faster than you can blink." As if to prove his point, a young blonde woman emerged from the elevator wearing a crisp manager's uniform. Rachel immediately brightened again. "Stephanie! Perfect timing. I need you to handle the VIP arrivals this afternoon. This is excellent experience for your management training." Stephanie couldn't have been more than 25, and Brandon noticed the newer employees watching with barely concealed frustration. Several of them had been at the hotel far longer but had never been offered such opportunities. Brandon had seen enough for now. He turned to James and spoke quietly. "I need a room for tonight. Can you help me check in without going through the front desk?" James nodded knowingly. "I can get you set up through the system. What name should I use?" "Brandon Taylor," he said, using his middle name as a surname. "And James? What I saw out there today, is this normal?" The older man's expression grew heavy. "Mr. Ellis, in 30 years of hospitality work, I've never seen anything like what's been happening here. We used to be proud to work at the Grandview. Now," he shrugged sadly, "now we just try to keep our heads down and hope we make it through another day." As Brandon followed James deeper into the staff corridors, he made a mental note of every slight, every dismissal, every moment of casual cruelty he'd witnessed. Rachel Whitmore had no idea that her reign of discrimination was about to come to an end. Room 1247 was modest by Grandview standards, a standard king room that normally housed business travelers. But for Brandon, it was the perfect vantage point to observe his hotel's operations without drawing attention. He'd specifically requested a room on a floor where he could easily access staff areas through the service elevators. After settling in, Brandon opened his laptop and logged into the hotel's internal systems using his administrative access. What he found in the employment records made his blood run cold. In the 8 months since Rachel's arrival, staff turnover had increased by 40%. More troubling was the pattern in who was leaving versus who was being promoted. Of the 12 employees terminated or who had voluntarily resigned, 10 were people of color. Meanwhile, 7 new management positions had been created, 6 of them filled by young white employees with minimal experience. Brandon pulled up Kevin's personnel file first. 5 years of exemplary service, consistently high guest satisfaction scores, and multiple commendations from previous managers. Yet under Rachel's supervision, his file showed 3 written warnings in the past 6 months for attitude problems and failure to maintain professional standards. A soft knock at his door interrupted his research. Brandon opened it to find Maria, the housekeeping supervisor from earlier. She looked nervous, clutching a stack of fresh towels. "Mr. Taylor? I'm Maria Santos. James said you might need extra towels," she said quietly, though both of them knew this was a pretext. "Please come in," Brandon said, stepping aside. And it's just Brandon. Maria entered hesitantly, setting the towels on the dresser. James said you seemed like someone who might understand what's happening here. He said you were asking questions. I am. Would you be willing to tell me what you've experienced? Maria's composure cracked slightly. I've worked here for 7 years. I started as a room attendant and worked my way up to supervisor. I was proud of that. My family came from nothing, you know? This job meant everything to me. What changed? Ms. Whitmore arrived and everything shifted overnight. She said the housekeeping department needed restructuring to improve guest perception. Within 2 months, she demoted me back to room attendant and brought in someone new to supervise, a girl named Ashley who never worked housekeeping a day in her life. Brandon's jaw tightened. What reason did she give? Guest complaints, she said. But when I asked to see them, she told me they were confidential and I needed to accept her decision or find another job. Maria's voice wavered. I have 3 kids, Mr. Brandon. I can't afford to lose this job, even if it means being treated like I'm invisible. Over the next hour, Brandon heard similar stories. James arranged for several long-term employees to visit his room under the guise of room service or maintenance calls. Each conversation revealed another piece of the toxic puzzle Rachel had created. David Chin, the night auditor, had been passed over for the assistant manager position he'd been training for, given instead to Tyler, a recent college graduate with no hotel experience. When David questioned the decision, Rachel had suggested he might be happier at a property more suited to his cultural background. Fatima Al-Rashid, who'd worked in guest relations for 4 years, had been written up for wearing her hijab, with Rachel claiming it made guests uncomfortable. When Fatima filed a complaint with HR, the report mysteriously vanished from the system. Most disturbing was the story from Janet Williams, a veteran housekeeper. She'd witnessed Rachel coaching Tyler on which employees to keep an eye on during his management training. She told him that certain types of people require more supervision. Janet whispered, her voice barely audible. Said he needed to document everything they did wrong because we might need it later. I heard her with my own ears. By evening, Brandon had documented a pattern of systematic discrimination that went far beyond individual prejudice. Rachel had weaponized the hotel's HR systems, creating false documentation, burying legitimate complaints, and building cases against employees based solely on their race or ethnicity. But the most shocking discovery came when Brandon accessed the guest feedback system. He found dozens of complaints about Rachel's behavior, guests who'd witnessed her treatment of staff and were appalled by it. All of these complaints had been marked as resolved in the system, but Brandon could find no evidence that any action had been taken. One complaint from Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a frequent guest, particularly stood out. I was mortified to see your operations manager berate a young man of color in front of the entire lobby. When I attempted to speak with her about it, she dismissed my concerns and suggested I might prefer a different type of establishment if I didn't appreciate their high standards. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Rachel had responded to Mrs. Hartwell's complaint by having her removed from the VIP guest list and flagging her reservation privileges as problematic, guest discretion advised. As Brandon compiled his evidence, his phone buzzed with a text from James. She's in the employee break room right now giving Tyler his training. You might want to see this. Brandon made his way to the staff areas, his employee access card still working perfectly. Through a crack in the break room door, he could hear Rachel's voice clearly. The key to managing this workforce is understanding that some people need more structure than others, she was saying. You'll learn to spot the ones who think they deserve special treatment just because of their background. Document everything, every late arrival, every mistake, every attitude problem. Build your cases systematically. Tyler's voice was uncertain. But some of these employees have excellent records. Previous management was too lenient. Rachel cut him off. We're running a business, not a charity. Our guests expect a certain aesthetic. They're paying premium prices for an experience that makes them comfortable. Brandon had heard enough. He quietly returned to his room, his mind racing with plans. Rachel had built her discriminatory system carefully, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd done it all through digital systems that left a perfect trail of evidence. Tomorrow morning, he would call an emergency staff meeting. And Rachel Whitmore was about to learn that her carefully constructed house of discrimination was built on sand. At 6:30 a.m., Brandon placed a call to Patricia Chin, his chief operating officer and one of the few people who knew he was back in the country. "Brandon? Thank God you're back. How was Singapore?" Patricia's voice was warm but professional. "Patricia, I need you to arrange an emergency all-staff meeting at the Grandview. This morning at 10 a.m. sharp. Everyone, management, housekeeping, front desk, maintenance, kitchen staff. Everyone. That's unusual. Is everything all right? Not even close. I also need you to contact board members Harrison, Williams, and Torres. Tell them to be there. And Patricia? Make sure the hotel's general counsel is present." The urgency in Brandon's voice told Patricia not to ask questions. "I'll handle it immediately. Should I notify the current management team?" "Just tell them it's an executive directive. Don't mention my name." By 9:45 a.m., word of the mysterious meeting had spread throughout the hotel like wildfire. Staff members gathered in the grand ballroom, whispering among themselves. The ornate space, usually reserved for wedding receptions and corporate galas, buzzed with nervous energy. Rachel paced near the entrance, her face flushed with indignation. She'd spent the morning trying to cancel the meeting, insisting it violated proper protocol. When her calls to corporate offices were deflected, she'd grown increasingly agitated. "This is completely inappropriate," she announced loudly to anyone within earshot. "We can't just shut down operations for some corporate bureaucrat's power trip. Our guests expect seamless service." Tyler stood nearby, fidgeting with his tie. "Maybe it's about the new health and safety regulations? It's about someone overstepping their authority," Rachel snapped. "When I find out who authorized this without going through proper channels, there will be consequences." At exactly 10 a.m., the ballroom doors swung open. Patricia Chin entered first, followed by 3 distinguished board members. But it was the 4th person who caused the room to fall into stunned silence. Brandon Ellis walked to the podium wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. For a moment, the only sound was the soft whisper of the air conditioning system. Rachel's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then pure horror as the implications hit her. The man she'd dismissed as service staff 24 hours earlier now stood before her as obviously someone of tremendous importance. "Good morning," Brandon said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "For those who don't know me, I'm Brandon Ellis, founder and CEO of Ellis Hospitality Group. I own this hotel." The silence was deafening. James, standing near the back with the other long-term staff, allowed himself a small smile. Maria gripped her supervisor's arm, her eyes wide with shock. Kevin's mouth fell open as he realized who had witnessed his humiliation the day before. But it was Rachel who commanded everyone's attention. Her face had gone completely pale, and she swayed slightly as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "Yesterday morning," Brandon continued, "I returned to this hotel unannounced after 18 months abroad. I wanted to see how my business was truly operating. What I discovered was deeply disturbing." He gestured to the large screen behind him, which displayed the hotel's logo. "This company was built on principles of excellence, respect, and equal opportunity. What I found instead was a culture of discrimination, intimidation, and systematic bias." Rachel finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "Mr. Ellis, I had no idea if you had identified yourself." "Ms. Whitmore," Brandon interrupted calmly, "the way you treated me yesterday was inexcusable. But it was nothing compared to how you've been treating my employees for the past 8 months." The room was electric with tension. Several staff members leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. "I've spent the last 24 hours conducting a thorough investigation," Brandon continued. "I've reviewed personnel files, interviewed employees, and examined our internal systems. What I've discovered is a pattern of behavior that violates not only our company values but federal employment law. Rachel's hands trembled as she clutched her folder. I can explain everything. I've been working to improve efficiency and maintain standards. Whose standards? Brandon's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the calm. Standards that judge employees by their appearance rather than their performance? Standards that promote based on race rather than merit? Standards that bury guest complaints and silence employee voices? The board members exchanged grave looks. Patricia Chin sat with her laptop open, taking notes of every word. I've spent 15 years building this company's reputation, Brandon said, his voice growing stronger. I've worked to create opportunities for people who look like me, who came from where I came from. And I will not stand by while someone destroys that legacy. He turned to address the entire room. To the employees who've suffered in silence, who've been passed over for promotion, who've been made to feel less than worthy, I see you. I hear you. And I'm here to make this right. Rachel made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Mr. Ellis, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. If we could discuss this privately. The time for private discussions ended yesterday when you told me I didn't belong in my own hotel, Brandon replied. Today, we address this publicly, with transparency and accountability. The room held its collective breath as Brandon reached for remote control. The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the first slide of his presentation. Let me show you exactly what's been happening at the Grandview Palace. The first image that appeared on the screen was a chart showing staff turnover rates. The contrast was stark, a steady line for years, then a sharp spike beginning 8 months ago. In the 8 months since Ms. Whitmore joined our team, Brandon began, we've lost 40% more employees than in any previous year. But the real story isn't in the numbers, it's in the pattern. He clicked to the next slide, showing 2 columns of employee photos. One side showed the faces of those who had left or been demoted, predominantly people of color. The other showed new hires and promotions, almost exclusively young white employees. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Several board members leaned forward, their expressions growing increasingly grave. Ms. Whitmore, Brandon said, turning to face her directly, would you like to explain this coincidence? Rachel's voice came out shaky. Those were performance-based decisions. I have documentation. You're right, you do have documentation, Brandon interrupted, clicking to the next slide. Let's examine some of it. The screen now displayed Kevin's personnel file. Kevin Martinez, 5 years of exemplary service, multiple guest commendations, perfect attendance until his wife's illness. Yet under your supervision, he received 3 written warnings in 6 months. Brandon read directly from the screen. Warning dated March 15th. Employee displayed unprofessional attitude when questioned about overtime scheduling. Kevin, would you like to tell everyone what really happened that day? Kevin stood slowly, his voice barely audible. My daughter had a school play. I asked if someone else could cover the evening shift since I'd already worked 6 straight days. Ms. Whitmore said if I couldn't handle the responsibilities, maybe I should find another job. The warning states you were argumentative and insubordinate, Brandon continued. But we have security footage of that conversation. Would you like to see it, Ms. Whitmore? Rachel's face had gone ashen. That's taken out of context. Brandon clicked again. Let's look at Fatima Al-Rashid's file. Written up for her hijab making guests uncomfortable. Fatima, how many guest complaints did you actually receive about your religious attire? Fatima stood with quiet dignity. None, sir. I asked to see the complaints, but Ms. Whitmore said they were confidential. That's because they don't exist, Brandon said coldly. I've reviewed every guest feedback form, every online review, every complaint in our system. There isn't a single negative comment about Fatima's hijab. In fact, several guests specifically praised her professionalism and cultural sensitivity. The room was dead silent except for the soft sound of Patricia Chin typing notes. Brandon advanced to the next slide, audio waveforms indicating recorded conversations. Yesterday evening, I recorded a conversation between Ms. Whitmore and Tyler Jenkins, where she was providing what she called management training. He pressed play, and Rachel's voice filled the ballroom clearly. The key to managing this workforce is understanding that some people need more structure than others. You'll learn to spot the ones who think they deserve special treatment just because of their background. Tyler's face turned red as his own voice came through the speakers asking about employees with excellent records. Previous management was too lenient. Rachel's recorded voice continued. We're running a business, not a charity. Our guests expect a certain aesthetic. The audio stopped, leaving a heavy silence. Several staff members were openly staring at Rachel with disgust. Ms. Whitmore, Brandon said, his voice cutting through the silence. In your own words, you've admitted to discriminatory hiring and management practices based on race and ethnicity. Rachel finally snapped. You have no idea what it's like trying to maintain standards in this industry. Yes, I made decisions based on what's best for business. Our guests have expectations. Our guests, Brandon interrupted, pulling up another slide, have been complaining about you. The screen now showed a series of guest feedback forms. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a loyal customer for 8 years, witnessed you berating Kevin and filed a formal complaint. You not only ignored her complaint but removed her from our VIP list and flagged her as a problematic guest. He clicked through more examples. Mr. Robertson wrote, the operations manager's treatment of staff was appalling and made our entire family uncomfortable. Mrs. Sarah Johnson, I've never been so embarrassed to be associated with a hotel. 6 more similar complaints, all buried in the system. Brandon turned to face the entire room. Ms. Whitmore didn't just discriminate against our employees, she drove away the kind of guests who actually represent our values. Rachel made one last desperate attempt. This is all circumstantial. You can't prove intent. Actually, I can. Brandon displayed one final slide, an email chain between Rachel and an outside recruiting firm. These emails show you specifically requesting candidates who would fit the visual brand of the hotel and asking them to prioritize applicants who match our upscale clientele demographic. The email was damning, with Rachel explicitly asking the recruiter to focus on attractive, well-spoken candidates who understand luxury service, while noting that urban applicants might not be the right cultural fit. Board member Harrison Williams spoke for the first time, his voice stern. Ms. Whitmore, these practices expose this company to significant legal liability and violate every principle we stand for. Effective immediately, Brandon announced. Rachel Whitmore is terminated from her position. Security will escort her from the premises. Any manager who knowingly participated in these discriminatory practices will face disciplinary action, up to and including termination. Tyler stepped forward, his voice shaking. Mr. Ellis, I want you to know I was uncomfortable with what she was teaching me. I never implemented any of those practices. Brandon studied the young man's face. We'll be conducting individual interviews with all management staff. Those who acted with integrity will be retained and properly trained. Those who didn't will be shown the door. He turned back to the full assembly. But terminating the problem isn't enough. Today, I'm announcing a complete overhaul of our hiring, promotion, and management practices. Rachel was escorted out by security, her protests echoing down the hallway until the ballroom doors closed behind her. The real work of rebuilding the Grandview Palace was about to begin. 3 months later, Brandon stood in the same ballroom where he'd exposed Rachel's discrimination, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The space buzzed with genuine excitement as employees gathered for the hotel's quarterly recognition ceremony, a new tradition Brandon had instituted as part of his comprehensive reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, Brandon announced from the podium, I'm proud to introduce our new general manager, someone who embodies the values and excellence we stand for, Maria Santos. The applause was thunderous as Maria stepped forward, beaming in her crisp new suit. The woman who had been demoted to room attendant was now leading the entire operation, her promotion the result of her exceptional leadership during the transition period. When I started here 7 years ago as a room attendant, Maria said, her voice strong and clear, I never imagined I'd be standing here today. This hotel has taught me that with hard work, integrity, and the right leadership, anything is possible. The transformation had been swift but thorough. Within days of Rachel's termination, Brandon had implemented what he called the Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to eliminate bias and create genuine opportunities for advancement. Kevin Martinez, once threatened with termination for asking for time off, now served as Assistant General Manager. His first initiative had been establishing flexible scheduling policies that respected employees' family obligations. Employee satisfaction scores had improved by 60% in just 3 months. Fatima Al-Rashid had been promoted to Director of Guest Relations, where her cultural sensitivity and multilingual skills had earned rave reviews from international visitors. The guest feedback that once praised the hotel's exclusivity now celebrated its genuine warmth and authentic hospitality. But perhaps the most meaningful change was visible in the small daily interactions. Brandon watched as staff members moved through the lobby with confidence, greeting guests with genuine smiles instead of nervous compliance. The fearful glances and whispered conversations had been replaced by open communication and collaborative problem-solving. The numbers tell our story, Brandon continued, addressing the assembled staff. Guest satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Our online reviews consistently mention the exceptional warmth and professionalism of our team. Employee turnover has dropped to the lowest levels in company history. James, now promoted to head of guest services, stood with tears in his eyes. At 62, he'd thought his career advancement was over. Instead, he was now training a new generation of hospitality professionals in what he called service with soul. Brandon clicked to a slide showing guest review excerpts. The staff at Grandview Palace made our stay unforgettable, not because of the marble and gold, but because of their genuine care. You can feel the positive energy the moment you walk in. This is what luxury hospitality should be: excellent service delivered by people who are clearly valued and respected. But the most powerful testament to the changes came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the guest whose complaint Rachel had buried, had returned to the hotel and specifically requested to speak with management. Mr. Ellis, she had said during her visit the previous week, I've stayed at luxury hotels around the world, but I've never experienced anything like what you've created here. Your staff doesn't just serve guests, they share their joy. That's something you can't train or fake. The financial impact had been equally dramatic. Revenue had increased by 22% as word-of-mouth recommendations brought new guests. The hotel's waiting list for reservations had grown from 6 months to nearly a year. More importantly, the Grandview Palace had become a destination that guests chose not just for luxury, but for values. Brandon had also established the Pathway Program, a partnership with local community colleges that provided hospitality education and guaranteed job placement for graduates. 50% of the positions were reserved for candidates from underrepresented communities. But our success isn't measured only in profits or ratings, Brandon said, advancing to his final slide. It's measured in the dreams we help people achieve, the families we support, and the community we build together. The slide showed a photo of the hotel's newest initiative, the Ellis Foundation Scholarship Fund. Brandon had committed 50% of the Grandview Palace's profits to providing education and training opportunities for frontline hospitality workers nationwide. When I walked into this hotel 3 months ago and was told I didn't belong here, Brandon said, his voice carrying deep emotion, I learned something important. True luxury isn't about excluding people, it's about elevating them. It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive and succeed. Tyler Jenkins, who had been retained after proving his commitment to equity, raised his hand. Mr. Ellis, what advice would you give to other companies facing similar challenges? Brandon smiled. Start by listening. Really listening. The people who clean your rooms, serve your food, and welcome your guests, they're not just employees. They're the heart of your business. When you invest in their dignity and their dreams, everything else follows. As the ceremony concluded and employees returned to their duties, Brandon remained in the ballroom for a moment, watching through the windows as guests and staff interacted in the lobby below. The Grandview Palace gleamed as beautifully as ever, but now that beauty went deeper than marble and gold. It reflected the dignity, respect, and opportunity that Brandon had always envisioned when he first dreamed of building something extraordinary. The hotel that had once symbolized exclusion had become a beacon of what was possible when true leadership met genuine change. The man who had been turned away at his own door had transformed not just the business, but the lives of everyone who walked through it.